The woman stumbling into Eagar, Arizona on a blistering August afternoon in 1883 looked like death itself had dragged her through the desert and spit her out at the edge of town. Her dress hung in tatters, her bare feet left bloody prints in the dust, and her dark hair clung to her face in matted tangles. She collapsed near the water trough outside the Lucky Star Saloon, and that was where Preston Nolan found her. Preston had been checking on his horse when he heard the soft thud of her body hitting the ground. He was a tall man of 27, with sun-weathered skin and hands calloused from years of ranch work. His dark hair needed a trim, and his gray eyes had seen enough of the world to make him wary, but not cruel. When he knelt beside the woman and turned her over gently, those gray eyes widened at the bruises covering her face and arms. "Madam," he said quietly, reaching for the dipper in the water trough. "Can you hear me?" Her eyes fluttered open, revealing irises the color of honey catching light. She flinched away from him instinctively, raising one arm as if to ward off a blow. "Easy now," Preston said, keeping his voice low and steady. "Nobody's going to hurt you. You need water." She stared at him for a long moment, as if trying to determine whether he was telling the truth. Finally, she nodded, just barely. Preston helped her sit up against the trough and brought the dipper to her cracked lips. She drank greedily, water spilling down her chin. "Slow down," he cautioned. "You will make yourself sick." She pulled back, gasping, then looked at him with those haunted eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice raw. "What is your name?" Preston asked. She hesitated so long he thought she might not answer. "Katherine," she finally said. "Katherine Adams." "I am Preston Nolan. What happened to you, Miss Adams?" Katherine's face closed off immediately and she looked away. "It does not matter. You are hurt. You need a doctor." "I do not have any money." Her voice was flat, defeated. "Doc Henderson will see you anyway. He is not the kind to turn away someone in need." Preston stood and offered her his hand. "Can you walk?" Katherine stared at his outstretched hand as if it were a snake that might strike. Preston waited patiently, not moving, until finally she placed her torn and bloodied fingers in his palm. He pulled her up gently, and she swayed on her feet. Without thinking, Preston put an arm around her waist to steady her. She went rigid at his touch. "Just trying to keep you from falling," he said quietly, but he loosened his grip, letting her lean against him without feeling trapped. They made slow progress down the dusty main street of Eagar. The town was small, barely more than a collection of wooden buildings scattered along the railroad line that had been extended into eastern Arizona just a few years back. The mountains rose in the distance, providing some relief from the desert heat, and ponderosa pines dotted the landscape. It was high country here, nearly 7,000 feet up, which meant the nights got cold even in summer. Doc Henderson's office was above the general store. Preston helped Katherine up the stairs, feeling how thin she was beneath the ruined dress. She could not weigh more than 100 pounds soaking wet. The doctor was a gray-haired man in his 50s with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles. He took one look at Katherine and gestured toward the examination room. "Bring her in here, Preston." "I will wait outside," Preston said, but Katherine's hand suddenly gripped his arm. "Please," she whispered. "Do not leave." Something in her voice made Preston's chest tighten. He looked at Doc Henderson, who nodded. "You can stay if the lady wants you here. Just turn around while I examine her." Preston faced the wall while the doctor helped Katherine out of what remained of her dress. He heard her sharp intake of breath, heard the doctor's low curse. "Who did this to you, child?" Doc Henderson asked gently. "My husband." Katherine's voice was barely audible. "My late husband." "Late." "He died 3 days ago. Fell off his horse drunk and broke his neck." Preston's hands curled into fists at his sides. The bruises he had seen on her face were recent, but something told him they were far from the first. Doc Henderson worked in silence for several minutes, cleaning wounds and wrapping Katherine's feet in bandages. "You have a couple of cracked ribs," he said finally. "Multiple contusions, some infected cuts on your feet, and you are severely dehydrated and malnourished. You need rest and proper food." "I will sleep under the stars tonight," Katherine said. "I have done it before." "The hell you will," Preston said, turning around before remembering he was supposed to keep his back to her. But the doctor had already helped her into one of his wife's old dresses, a simple blue calico that hung loose on Katherine's thin frame. "Preston is right," Doc Henderson said. "You need a proper bed and regular meals. Where is your family?" "Dead, all of them. It was just me and—" She trailed off, her jaw tightening. "Just me and him, and now it is just me." "The boarding house has rooms," Preston offered. Katherine laughed, a bitter sound. "I told you I have no money. Carl, my husband, he spent every cent we had on whiskey and cards. When he died, I searched everywhere. There was nothing, not even enough for a decent burial. The other ranch hands, they buried him in a shallow grave and told me I had 3 days to get off the property, or they would do to me what Carl had been letting them." She stopped, her face flushing with shame. Preston felt rage building in his chest, hot and dangerous. "Where was this ranch?" "About 30 miles west of here, the Broken Arrow. But it does not matter now. I left. I walked for 2 days, hiding from riders during the day, traveling at night. I do not know why. There is nowhere for me to go. Nothing left." "You can stay at my place," Preston said. Both Katherine and Doc Henderson stared at him. "I have a small ranch about 5 miles north of town," Preston continued. "It is not much, just a cabin and a barn with some horses and cattle. But I have an extra room you can use until you figure out what you want to do." "I cannot accept charity," Katherine said stiffly. "It is not charity. I need help around the place. My last hand left 2 months ago, and I have been trying to manage everything myself. You can cook, I am guessing. Clean, help with the chickens and the garden. Yes, but then you will earn your keep, $1 a week plus room and board. That is fair." Katherine's eyes shimmered with tears she refused to let fall. "Why are you doing this? You do not know me. I could be a thief or a liar or worse." Preston met her gaze steadily. "You are a woman who needs help, and I am a man who can provide it. Sometimes it is that simple." "Nothing is ever that simple," Katherine whispered. Doc Henderson cleared his throat. "I think Preston's offer is generous, Miss Adams. You need time to heal, both in body and spirit. His ranch is a good place for that." Katherine looked between the two men, and Preston could see the internal struggle playing out across her face. Pride warred with desperation. Finally, desperation won, though it seemed to cost her something to admit it. "1 week," she said. "I will stay 1 week and see how it goes." "Fair enough," Preston agreed. After Doc Henderson finished treating Katherine's wounds, Preston paid the doctor and helped Katherine back down to the street. He had a wagon parked outside the saloon, and he brought it around to the doctor's office so Katherine would not have to walk far. She climbed into the seat with visible effort, every movement clearly painful. The ride out to Preston's ranch was quiet. Katherine kept her eyes on the landscape, watching the ponderosa pines and scrub brush roll past. The afternoon sun cast long shadows, and the air smelled of pine resin and dry earth. In the distance, the white mountains rose against the impossibly blue sky. "It is beautiful here," Katherine said softly. "So different from West Texas, where I grew up. You are from Texas." "Little town called San Angelo. My parents had a farm there, cotton mostly, some cattle." Her voice grew distant. "They died of fever when I was 18. I had no other family, and Carl came through town looking for work. He was charming then. Handsome, said all the right things." She laughed bitterly. I was such a fool. You were young and alone. He took advantage of that. I should have seen what he was, but I did not want to be alone anymore, so I convinced myself the red flags were just my imagination. By the time I realized the truth, we were already married and heading west. He had heard about ranch work in Arizona, but he could never keep a job. Too much drinking, too much fighting. We moved from place to place, each situation worse than the last. The Broken Arrow was the worst. The foreman there, he and Carl were cut from the same cloth. They would drink together, gamble together, and when Carl was too drunk to stand, the foreman would. She stopped, her hands clenching in her lap. Preston kept his eyes on the road, giving her space to speak or not speak, whichever she needed. "I am used up and worthless," Katherine said quietly. "That is what Carl told me over and over, what the other men said too, and maybe they were right. Maybe I am." Preston pulled the wagon to a stop right there in the middle of the road. He turned to face Katherine fully, and his voice was firm when he spoke. "You are priceless and mine to protect now, for as long as you are on my land, and I do not ever want to hear you call yourself worthless again." "Do you understand?" Katherine stared at him, her honey-colored eyes wide with shock. "You do not even know me." "I know enough. I know you survived something that would have broken most people. I know you walked 30 miles through dangerous country rather than stay in a place that was destroying you. I know you have more strength in your little finger than those men had in their whole bodies combined." Preston picked up the reins again and clicked to the horses. "Now let us get you home." Home. The word seemed to echo in the air between them. Katherine did not respond, but Preston saw her wipe at her eyes quickly when she thought he was not looking. Preston's ranch came into view as they crested a small rise. It was modest, as he had said. A sturdy log cabin with a stone chimney, a barn in decent repair, a chicken coop and several corrals. A garden plot stretched out behind the cabin, and Preston could see he needed to weed it soon. Beyond the immediate buildings, grassland rolled away toward the mountains, dotted with his small herd of cattle. "It is not fancy," Preston said as he pulled the wagon up to the cabin, "but it is solid and safe." Katherine climbed down from the wagon carefully, favoring her injured ribs. She looked around slowly, taking in every detail. "It is wonderful," she said, and Preston could hear the sincerity in her voice. He helped her inside, where the main room held a stone fireplace, a simple kitchen area with a cast iron stove, a wooden table with 4 chairs, and a sitting area with a worn but comfortable sofa. 2 doors led to bedrooms on either side of the main room. "That one is yours," Preston said, pointing to the left. "It has a bed, a dresser, and a washstand. Not much else, I am afraid. My last hand was not particular about decoration." Katherine walked to the door and pushed it open. The room was small but clean, with a window that looked out toward the mountains. The bed had a simple quilt, and everything smelled of pine soap. "It is perfect," Katherine said. "You should rest. I need to see to the horses and the other animals, but I will make supper when I come back in." "Nothing fancy, just beans and cornbread probably." "I can cook," Katherine offered. "Not tonight. Tonight you rest. Doctor's orders, remember?" Preston gave her a small smile. "There will be plenty of time for you to earn your keep starting tomorrow." Katherine nodded slowly. She looked exhausted, swaying slightly on her feet. "Thank you, Preston. I do not know why you are being so kind to me, but thank you." "No thanks needed. Now get some sleep." Preston left her there and went out to tend to his animals. He unhitched the wagon horses and led them to the barn, where 3 other horses greeted him with soft wickers. He fed and watered all of them, mucked out the stalls, and then checked on the chickens. The hens had been busy, and he collected half a dozen eggs. While he worked, his mind kept returning to Katherine's battered face and haunted eyes. The fury he had felt earlier had not diminished. If Carl Adams were still alive, Preston thought, he might have done something he would regret. But the man was dead, and Katherine was free of him, though Preston suspected the scars ran deeper than the physical wounds. He had told her she was priceless, and he had meant it. There was something about her, some core of strength beneath the brokenness, that called to him. He barely knew her, but he recognized that she was worth protecting, worth defending. Maybe it was just the basic human decency of not wanting to see someone suffer. Or maybe it was something more. Preston shook his head at himself as he filled the water trough. He was getting ahead of himself. Katherine needed a safe place to heal, nothing more. She had just escaped a nightmare of a marriage. The last thing she needed was another man making demands on her. When he returned to the cabin an hour later, it was to find Katherine asleep on top of the quilt in her room, her door left slightly ajar. She had not even taken off her shoes, just collapsed in exhaustion. Preston quietly pulled the door closed most of the way to give her privacy, then set about making supper. He kept it simple, as promised. Beans simmered on the stove with some salt pork, and he mixed up cornbread batter and put it in the oven to bake. While he worked, he thought about what else Katherine might need. Clothes, certainly. The dress Doc Henderson had given her was clean but worn thin with age, shoes, basic supplies. He would take her into town in a few days once she had recovered a bit, let her pick out what she needed. The smell of cooking must have woken her, because Katherine appeared in the doorway to the main room just as Preston was pulling the cornbread from the oven. "I am sorry," she said. "I meant to help with supper." "You needed the sleep more. Feeling any better?" "A little." She moved stiffly, one hand pressed to her ribs. "What can I do?" "Set the table if you want. Plates are in that cupboard, utensils in the drawer." They worked together in companionable silence. When the food was ready, they sat down at the small table, and Preston said a simple grace before they ate. Katherine ate slowly at first, as if afraid the food might be taken away, but gradually she relaxed. Preston noticed she had 3 helpings of beans and 2 pieces of cornbread. "This is good," she said. "Better than anything I have had in months. Basic ranch cooking. Wait until you try my stew. That is actually edible." Preston refilled her water glass from the pitcher. "Tomorrow, if you are feeling up to it, I can show you around the place properly. Let you know what the daily routine looks like. I will be up to it." Katherine straightened her shoulders despite the obvious pain it caused her. "I am stronger than I look." "I do not doubt that for a second." After supper, Katherine insisted on cleaning up despite Preston's protests. He finally agreed when he saw how important it was to her to contribute something. While she washed dishes, he sat at the table and went over his account books, making notes about supplies he needed to pick up in town. "Preston," Katherine's voice was hesitant. "Yes." "Earlier, when you said I was yours to protect, did you mean that?" Preston set down his pencil and looked at her directly. "I did. You are under my roof, on my land. That makes you my responsibility, and I take my responsibilities seriously. I do not want to be anyone's responsibility. I spent 5 years being Carl's property, his possession to do with as he pleased. I cannot go through that again. That is not what I meant." Preston stood and walked over to where she stood by the wash basin. He kept a respectful distance, not crowding her. "You are not my property, Katherine. You are a free woman who happens to be staying on my ranch. But while you are here, I will make sure you are safe and protected. Not because I own you, but because it is the right thing to do. Do you understand the difference?" Katherine studied his face for a long moment. "I think I am starting to." "Good." Preston picked up a dish towel and started drying the plates she had washed. "For what it is worth, I think you are going to do just fine here. I hope you are right." That first night set the pattern for the days that followed. Preston gave Katherine space to heal, both physically and emotionally. He did not push her to talk about her past, but he listened when she wanted to. He showed her around the ranch, introducing her to each horse by name, teaching her his routine with the cattle and chickens. Katherine threw herself into the work with almost desperate energy. She cooked all the meals, cleaned the cabin until it gleamed, tended the garden, and even helped Preston mend fence line despite her injured ribs. Preston had to physically stop her from lifting heavy posts. "Slow down," he said gently. "You are going to hurt yourself worse." "I need to earn my keep," Katherine insisted. "You are doing that and more, but you are no good to me or yourself if you end up bedridden. Take it easy." It was hard for her, Preston could see. She had spent so long being told she was worthless that she felt compelled to prove her value every single moment. But gradually, as the days turned into a week and then two, she began to relax. The constant tension in her shoulders eased. She smiled more often, though the smiles were still tentative, as if she were testing whether happiness was allowed. Preston found himself looking forward to meal times when they would sit together and talk about the day. Katherine was intelligent and well-read, despite her limited formal education. She had opinions about everything from politics to poetry, and she was not afraid to disagree with Preston when she thought he was wrong. "I am telling you Grant was a better general than Lee," Preston argued one evening over supper. "Absolutely not," Katherine countered. "Lee had inferior numbers and resources throughout the war and still nearly won. That takes brilliance. It takes stubbornness." Grant understood that the North's advantage was in its ability to keep fighting, to wear down the South through attrition. That is strategy. That is just throwing men at the problem until it goes away. Katherine pointed her fork at him for emphasis. Lee actually outmaneuvered his opponents. Chancellorsville alone was followed by Gettysburg, where Lee's arrogance cost the South everything. They debated for another 20 minutes, neither giving an inch, until finally they were both laughing at the absurdity of it. Preston could not remember the last time he had enjoyed an argument so much. "You are surprisingly well informed about the war between the states for someone who was not even born when it happened," Preston observed. "My father was a Union soldier. He told me all his stories growing up. I think talking about it helped him make sense of what he had seen." Katherine's expression grew sad. "He had nightmares until the day he died. My father, too. He fought for the North as well, came west afterward because he could not stand to be in Pennsylvania anymore. Too many ghosts." "Is he still alive? Your father?" "No, he died 6 years ago. My mother followed him a year later. I think she just did not want to be here without him." Preston stared into his coffee cup. They loved each other something fierce. Fought like cats and dogs half the time, but they were devoted to each other. "That must have been nice," Katherine said softly. "To see real love like that." It was. It also made it hard to settle for anything less. "I watched other men rush into marriage with the first woman who would have them, and I could never do it. I kept thinking about how my parents were together, and I knew I wanted that or nothing." "Have you ever been in love?" The question caught Preston off guard. He considered lying, then decided Katherine deserved honesty. "Once. Her name was Elizabeth. We courted for about a year when I was 23, but she wanted to move back east to Boston where her family was from. She said she could not stand the isolation out here, the roughness of it. She wanted society and culture and things I could not give her. I am sorry. I am not anymore. She was not willing to build a life with me, only to have me fit into the life she wanted. That is not partnership." Preston looked at Katherine. "What about you? Was there anyone before Carl?" "A boy back in San Angelo. Daniel. We were sweethearts when we were young, but his family moved to California when we were 16. He wrote for a while, then stopped. I heard later he married a girl from Sacramento. Katherine traced the rim of her cup with one finger. Sometimes I wonder what my life would have been like if I had married him instead of Carl. But that is pointless. You cannot change the past. No, but you can shape the future. Can you? Sometimes it feels like the future just happens to you, whether you want it to or not. Preston leaned forward, his expression serious. Your husband is dead, Katherine. You are free. You can go anywhere, do anything. The future is wide open. I have no money, no family, no prospects. How is that freedom? Because you get to choose what comes next. You are not trapped anymore. Preston reached across the table and covered her hand with his. It was the first time he had touched her since that day he found her, apart from helping her up into the wagon or steadying her when her ribs pained her. You survived, Katherine. Now you get to live. Katherine stared at their joined hands. She did not pull away, but Preston could feel her trembling. I do not know how, she whispered. Then learn. I will help you. She looked up at him then, and Preston saw tears streaming down her face. Why are you so kind to me? Because you deserve kindness. He squeezed her hand gently. Because you are stronger and braver than you know, and because I happen to think you are pretty remarkable. Katherine laughed through her tears. Remarkable. Me. The woman who stayed with a man who beat her for 5 years. The woman who survived 5 years of hell and still found the courage to walk away. Yes, remarkable. They sat there for a long moment, hands clasped across the table while Katherine cried. Preston did not try to stop her tears or tell her everything would be fine. He just held her hand and let her grieve for everything she had lost, everything that had been taken from her. When she finally pulled back, wiping her eyes on her sleeve, she gave him a watery smile. I am sorry. I did not mean to fall apart like that. You are allowed to fall apart. Lord knows you have earned it. Preston stood and started clearing the dishes. How about we skip the evening chores tonight and just sit on the porch? It is a nice evening and I think we could both use the rest. That sounds perfect. They sat on the porch as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. The air cooled quickly, and Preston fetched a blanket for Katherine when he saw her shiver. They did not talk much, just sat in companionable silence, listening to the cicadas and watching the stars emerge one by one. It was the first of many evenings they would spend that way. As August faded into September, Katherine continued to heal. The bruises faded from purple to yellow and finally disappeared. Her ribs stopped hurting when she moved. She gained weight, and color returned to her cheeks. But more than the physical healing, Preston noticed a change in her spirit. She laughed more easily now. She sang while she worked in the kitchen. She no longer flinched when he moved suddenly or raised his voice. She was, he realized, becoming herself again. Or perhaps becoming herself for the first time, freed from the weight of Carl's abuse. Preston tried not to notice how beautiful she was when she smiled. Tried not to think about how much he looked forward to coming in from the fields and finding her in the kitchen, flour on her nose, telling him about her day. Tried not to acknowledge the warmth that spread through his chest every time she laughed at one of his terrible jokes. He was failing miserably at all of it. The problem was that Katherine seemed to be having the same struggle. He caught her watching him sometimes when she thought he was not paying attention. She found excuses to be near him, to brush against his arm when she passed him something at dinner, to stand close when they were working together. And the way she looked at him, with something that might have been hope in her honey-colored eyes, made his heart race. But Preston held back. Katherine had been through too much to rush into anything. She needed time and space to figure out who she was outside of being Carl's victim. The last thing Preston wanted was to take advantage of her vulnerability, so he kept his distance. even though it was getting harder every day. The situation came to a head one afternoon in mid-September. Preston had been working on fixing a section of the corral fence when one of the posts snapped and caught him across the shoulder. It was not serious, just a deep scrape that bled more than it should, but Katherine reacted as if he had been shot. Preston. She ran across the yard and grabbed his arm. "Oh God, you are bleeding everywhere. It is just a scratch. I will be fine. You need to get that cleaned and bandaged. Come inside." She practically dragged him into the cabin and sat him down at the table. Then she fetched water and clean rags and set about cleaning the wound with gentle efficiency. Her hands were steady, but Preston could see the worry in her face. "Katherine, I am fine." "Really? You do not know that. It could get infected." She dabbed at the scrape with a wet cloth, her touch feather light. "You have to be more careful." "I will try to remember that." Preston tried to keep his tone light, but it was difficult with Katherine standing so close, her hands on his bare shoulder. He had stripped off his shirt so she could reach the wound, and he was acutely aware of every point where her fingers touched his skin. "There." Katherine finished bandaging the scrape and stepped back to examine her work. "That should hold. Change the bandage tomorrow and make sure to keep it clean." "Yes, madam." Preston reached for his shirt, but Katherine stopped him. "Wait, you have other scars." She touched a long white line along his ribs. "What happened here?" "Knife fight in Tombstone when I was 20. Other fellows started it, but I finished it." Her fingers trailed to a puckered scar on his upper arm. "And this?" "Bullet graze from a cattle rustler. That was 3 years ago. You could have been killed." "But I was not." Preston caught her hand before she could catalog any more of his old wounds. "Katherine, what is this about?" She looked at him, and he saw fear in her eyes. "I just realized that you could get hurt. You could die. And then where would I be? You would be fine. You are stronger than you think." "I do not want to be strong. I am tired of being strong." Her voice broke. "I want someone else to be strong for a while. I want someone I can depend on, someone who will not leave me alone again." "Katherine, I know it is selfish. I know I have no right to ask anything of you. You have already given me so much. But I cannot help it. When I saw you bleeding, I thought about what it would mean if something happened to you, and I realized that you have become the most important person in my life." She pulled her hand away from his and wrapped her arms around herself. "I am sorry. I should not have said that. It is too much, too fast." Preston stood slowly and took a step toward her. "What if I told you that you have become the most important person in my life too?" Katherine's head snapped up, her eyes wide. "What?" "I have been trying not to say anything because I did not want to pressure you or make you feel like you owed me something. But the truth is, I have been falling in love with you since the day I found you at that water trough." Preston reached out and gently cupped her face in his hands. "You are brave and kind and brilliant and beautiful. You make me laugh. You challenge me. You have brought life back to this ranch and to my heart, and if you feel even a fraction of what I feel, I would count myself the luckiest man alive." Tears spilled down Katherine's cheeks, but she was smiling. "I love you too. I have been so afraid to admit it, even to myself. Carl ruined so much for me. He made me believe I was not worthy of love, that I would never deserve happiness. And then you came along and treated me like I mattered, like I was valuable, and I did not know what to do with that. You matter more than you know." Preston brushed his thumbs across her cheekbones, wiping away her tears. "And you deserve all the happiness in the world. Preston, I am broken. I have scars that you cannot see, places inside me that Carl damaged beyond repair. Are you sure you want to take that on? Everyone has scars, Katherine. I have my share too, but scars just mean we survived something. They do not define us." He leaned his forehead against hers. "I want all of you, scars and all, if you will have me." "Yes," Katherine whispered. "Yes, I will have you." Preston kissed her then, soft and gentle, giving her every opportunity to pull away. But Katherine leaned into the kiss, her hands coming up to rest on his chest. It was sweet and tender and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathless. "That was nice," Katherine said with a shaky laugh. "It was." Preston pulled her into a careful hug, mindful of where her ribs had been injured. "We can take this as slow as you need." "I am not going anywhere." Katherine buried her face in his shoulder. "I know. That is what makes this so wonderful and terrifying at the same time." They stood there in the kitchen, holding each other as the afternoon light slanted through the windows. Outside, the chickens clucked and the horses whinnied, and somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed. It was an ordinary moment on an ordinary day, but it felt like everything had changed. After that day, things between them shifted subtly. Preston still slept in his own room, still gave Katherine space and respected her boundaries. But now there were stolen kisses when they passed each other in the cabin, held hands across the dinner table, long conversations on the porch that lasted until the stars wheeled overhead. Preston courted her properly, the way he thought she deserved. He brought her wildflowers from the meadow. He taught her to ride his gentlest horse so they could go out together to check on the cattle. He read poetry to her in the evenings, stumbling over the words sometimes, but trying his best because he knew she loved it. Katherine bloomed under the attention. She started wearing her hair down sometimes, and Preston loved running his fingers through the dark waves. She smiled constantly now, and her laughter was one of the best sounds Preston had ever heard. She still had nightmares occasionally, waking with a gasp and Carl's name on her lips, but Preston was always there to hold her until the fear passed. "You are safe," he would murmur into her hair. "I've got you. You are safe." In late October, Preston asked Katherine to marry him. He did it without a ring, without any fancy planning, just asked her one evening while they were sitting on the porch watching the sunset. "Marry me," he said simply. Katherine turned to look at him. "What?" "Marry me, Katherine. Be my wife. Spend the rest of your life here with me, building something good and real." Preston took her hands in his. "I love you. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want to have children with you and grow old with you and argue with you about Civil War generals until we are too old to remember which side won. Marry me." Katherine's eyes filled with tears. "Preston, I was married before. It was awful. The thought of going through that again, it would not be like that. I promise you, Katherine, I would never hurt you the way Carl did. Marriage is supposed to be a partnership, two people choosing each other every single day. That is what I want with you. What if I am not ready?" "Then we will wait until you are." Preston kissed her knuckles. "I am not going anywhere, remember. If you need a month or a year or 10 years, I will wait, but I wanted you to know that I am ready when you are." Katherine was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Ask me again at Christmas." "Christmas?" "Yes, ask me again on Christmas Day and I will give you my answer then." Preston smiled. "All right, Christmas it is." The months between October and December seemed to fly by. The weather turned colder and snow dusted the mountains. Preston worked to make sure they had enough wood stockpiled for winter and that the barn was secure. Katherine spent hours in the kitchen, cooking and baking, filling the cabin with wonderful smells. She made preserves from the apples in the small orchard behind the cabin and knitted Preston a warm scarf for the winter. They grew closer during those weeks, learning each other's rhythms and habits. Preston discovered that Katherine sang old hymns when she was happy, and that she had a terrible habit of leaving books open face down, wherever she had been reading them. Katherine learned that Preston talked to the horses like they were people, and that he could not carry a tune to save his life, but hummed constantly anyway. They learned how to navigate Catherine's difficult days, when the memories of Carl weighed heavy on her. Preston learned to recognize the signs that she was struggling, and to give her space when she needed it without making her feel abandoned. Katherine learned to ask for help when she needed it instead of trying to carry everything alone. They were building something real and lasting, brick by brick, day by day. Christmas arrived with a fresh blanket of snow. Preston woke early and started a fire in the fireplace, then made coffee and watched the sun rise over the white landscape. Katherine emerged from her room a little while later, wrapped in a quilt, her hair tousled from sleep. "Merry Christmas," Preston said, handing her a cup of coffee. "Merry Christmas." Katherine settled onto the sofa near the fire and sipped her coffee. "The snow is beautiful." "It is." Preston sat down beside her, suddenly nervous. "Katherine, do you remember what I asked you back in October?" "I remember. And you said I should ask you again at Christmas." "I did say that." Katherine set down her coffee cup and turned to face him. "Preston, I have been thinking about this every day for the past 2 months. I have been terrified and excited and uncertain and so many other things all at once. But I realized something last week when we were snowed in and could not leave the cabin for 3 days." "What did you realize?" "That I was completely happy. We were stuck inside, doing chores and cooking and reading together, and I realized I did not want to be anywhere else or with anyone else. You have given me back my life, Preston. You have shown me what love is supposed to look like. And I do not want to waste any more time being afraid of something that Carl ruined. He does not get to have that power over me anymore." Preston's heart was hammering in his chest. "So when I ask you to marry me, the answer is yes." Katherine smiled, radiant and beautiful. "Yes, I will marry you." Preston pulled her into his arms and kissed her soundly. "You have just made me the happiest man in Arizona." "When should we do this?" Katherine asked when they came up for air. "As soon as possible. There is a circuit preacher who comes through Eagar every few months. He should be here in January. We can get married then." "January? That gives me a month to prepare." Katherine bit her lip. "Preston, I do not have anything special to wear, and I do not have money for. We will figure it out together. Maybe we can go into town next week, get some fabric, and you can make yourself a dress. Nothing fancy, just something you feel pretty in." "I would like that." They spent the rest of Christmas Day together, just the two of them, enjoying the peace and quiet of the Snowden ranch. Preston had carved Katherine a small wooden box with a latch, and she gave him the scarf she had knitted. They cooked dinner together, laughing when Preston burned the rolls and Katherine oversalted the gravy. It did not matter. Everything tasted perfect because they were together. That night, as they sat by the fire, Katherine leaned her head on Preston's shoulder. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" "For seeing me when I thought I was invisible. For believing in me when I did not believe in myself. For loving me when I thought I was unlovable." Preston wrapped his arm around her and pulled her close. "Thank you for giving me a chance, for trusting me with your heart, for being brave enough to love again. We are going to have a good life together, are we not?" "The best," Preston promised. "I am going to spend every day making sure you know how much you are loved." "I already know." Katherine tilted her face up to kiss him. "I already know." The circuit preacher came through Eagar in mid-January, just as Preston had predicted. His name was Reverend Thomas Green, and he was a weathered man in his 60s who had been bringing religion to small western towns for most of his adult life. He agreed to marry Preston and Katherine on a cold Saturday morning at the small church in town. Katherine wore a dress she had sewn herself from blue fabric Preston had bought her in town. It was simple but elegant, with a fitted bodice and a full skirt. She had woven wildflowers, preserved from the summer, into her dark hair. She looked beautiful. Preston wore his best suit, which was not saying much. but he had shined his boots and trimmed his hair. He stood at the front of the church, watching Katherine walk down the aisle toward him, and thought his heart might burst from his chest. There were only a handful of people in attendance. Doc Henderson and his wife, the shopkeeper and his family, a few of Preston's ranching neighbors. But it did not matter. Preston only had eyes for Katherine. When she reached him, he took her hands in his and squeezed gently. She squeezed back, and he saw tears shining in her eyes. Happy tears, he thought. He hoped. Reverend Green led them through the traditional vows. Preston said the words clearly, meaning every single one of them. When it was Katherine's turn, her voice wavered at first but grew stronger as she went. I, Katherine Adams, take you, Preston Nolan, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to love you and cherish you in good times and bad, in sickness and health, for as long as we both shall live. Preston slid a simple gold band onto her finger. He had bought it from the jeweler in town, using nearly all the money he had saved, but it was worth it to see the way Katherine's face lit up when she saw it. By the power vested in me by the territory of Arizona, I now pronounce you husband and wife, Reverend Green said with a smile. Preston, you may kiss your bride. Preston cupped Katherine's face in his hands and kissed her gently. The small congregation applauded and someone let out a whoop. When they broke apart, Katherine was crying in earnest now, but she was smiling too. Hello, Mrs. Nolan, Preston said softly. Hello, Mr. Nolan, Katherine replied. They walked back down the aisle together, hand in hand, and out into the cold January sunshine. Someone had tied tin cans to the back of Preston's wagon, and they rattled noisily as he helped Katherine up into the seat. Ready to go home? He asked. More than ready. The ride back to the ranch was filled with laughter and excitement. Katherine kept looking at the ring on her finger as if she could not quite believe it was real. Preston kept stealing glances at her, marveling that she was his wife now, that they had a whole life ahead of them to build together. When they arrived at the cabin, Preston did something he had been thinking about for weeks. Before Katherine could climb down from the wagon, he came around to her side and scooped her up into his arms. Preston, she laughed. What are you doing, carrying my bride over the threshold? It is tradition. He carried her to the door of the cabin and shouldered it open, then stepped inside with Katherine still in his arms. You can put me down now, she said, but she did not sound like she really wanted him to. In a minute. Preston carried her over to the sofa and sat down with her in his lap. I want to tell you something first. All right. I know your first marriage was nothing like it should have been. I know Carl hurt you in ways that will take a long time to fully heal, but I want you to know that this is different. Our marriage is going to be built on love and respect and partnership. I am never going to hurt you, Katherine. I am never going to make you feel small or worthless or trapped. You are my equal, my partner, my love, and I am going to spend the rest of my life making sure you know that. Katherine's eyes were bright with tears again. I know, Preston, I trust you. That is why I said yes. I am still going to remind you every day just in case you forget. I do not think I could forget, not with you. Katherine kissed him softly. Thank you for giving me a second chance at happiness. Thank you for taking that chance with me. They sat there on the sofa for a long time, just holding each other, letting the reality of being married sink in. The fire crackled in the fireplace, and outside the wind whistled through the eaves, but inside the cabin it was warm and safe. Eventually, Katherine stirred. I should start making supper. Let me help. Preston stood and pulled her to her feet. We are partners now, remember. That means we do everything together. They cooked dinner side by side, bumping into each other in the small kitchen and laughing every time. Katherine kept pausing to kiss Preston, and he kept finding excuses to touch her. It took them twice as long as usual to prepare the meal, but neither of them minded. After dinner, they sat by the fire and talked about their plans for the future. Preston wanted to expand the cattle herd and maybe build a bigger barn. Katherine wanted to enlarge the garden and perhaps keep bees for honey. They talked about children, a conversation that made Katherine nervous but excited too. "I want children," she admitted. "But I am terrified. What if I am like Carl? What if I hurt them without meaning to?" "You would never hurt a child, Katherine. You have the kindest heart of anyone I have ever met." Preston took her hand. "And you would not be doing it alone. We would raise them together, teaching them and loving them and making mistakes probably, but doing our best." "You really think we could do it?" "I know we could. But there is no rush. We have all the time in the world." Katherine leaned against him, resting her head on his shoulder. "I love you, Preston Nolan." "I love you too, Katherine Nolan," her new name. It still sounded strange to her ears, but wonderful too. A fresh start. A new identity built not on pain and suffering but on love and hope. As the fire burned low and the night grew late, Preston and Katherine finally retired to their bedroom. Not separate rooms anymore, but one room, one bed, one life. Katherine was nervous, Preston could tell, but he was patient and gentle. He had waited months for this moment, and he was determined to make it good for her, to show her what it meant to be loved truly and completely. Later, as they lay tangled together in the darkness, Katherine whispered, "That was nothing like before. Carl never, he did not care if I—" She stopped, struggling for words. Preston kissed her forehead. "I will always care about your happiness, Katherine, in every way, always." "I am beginning to believe that." "Good." They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, warm and safe and loved. The weeks after the wedding were some of the happiest of Preston's life. He and Katherine fell into a comfortable routine as husband and wife. They woke together, worked together, ate together, and went to bed together. The ranch thrived under their joint care, and Preston found that having Katherine as a true partner made everything easier and more enjoyable. Katherine continued to heal emotionally. She still had hard days, moments when something would trigger a memory of Carl and she would withdraw into herself. But those days grew less frequent as time passed, and Preston learned how to help her through them without making her feel weak or broken. In March, Katherine discovered she was pregnant. She told Preston one evening after supper, her voice a mixture of joy and terror. "I am going to have a baby," she said simply. Preston's face broke into the widest smile Katherine had ever seen. He jumped up from his chair, crossed to her, and picked her up, spinning her around. "A baby, Katherine, that is wonderful. You are not upset." "Upset? Why would I be upset?" He set her down carefully as if she might break. "This is the best news I have ever heard." "I am scared," Katherine admitted. "What if something goes wrong? What if I am not a good mother? What if—" Preston silenced her with a kiss. "You are going to be an amazing mother, and nothing is going to go wrong. We will take care of each other, you and me and this baby. We are a family." Katherine burst into tears, and Preston held her while she cried. These were happy tears, he knew. Tears of relief and joy and hope for the future. "We are a family," Katherine repeated when she could speak again. "I like the sound of that." The pregnancy was not easy. Katherine was sick for the first few months, barely able to keep anything down. Preston worried constantly, hovering over her and trying to make sure she was comfortable. Doc Henderson assured them it was normal, that some women just had a harder time, but that did not stop Preston from fretting. By summer, the sickness had passed and Katherine bloomed. Her belly grew round and she glowed with health and happiness. Preston loved watching the changes in her body, loved placing his hand on her stomach and feeling the baby kick. "He is going to be strong," Preston said one evening, his palm pressed to Katherine's belly. It could be a girl. Either way, strong and healthy like the mother. Katherine smiled and covered Preston's hand with her own. "I cannot wait to meet this little one. To see who they look like, what kind of person they will be. They will be loved. That is all that matters." The baby came in early November, during the first snowstorm of the season. Katherine's labor started in the middle of the night, and Preston rode through the snow to fetch Doc Henderson. The doctor arrived just as dawn was breaking, and he set up in the bedroom while Preston paced in the main room, listening to Katherine's cries and feeling utterly helpless. "First babies take time," Doc Henderson called through the door. "She is doing fine, Preston. Stop wearing a hole in your floor." Preston tried to take the advice, but it was impossible. Every sound Katherine made went through him like a knife. He wanted to be in there with her, holding her hand, but the doctor had said it was better if he waited outside. Finally, after what felt like days but was probably only about 8 hours, Preston heard a new sound. A baby's cry, loud and strong and indignant. "Preston," Doc Henderson called. "Come meet your son." Preston practically ran into the bedroom. Katherine was propped up in bed, pale and exhausted but smiling. In her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. Doc Henderson was cleaning up, a satisfied look on his weathered face. "A son," the doctor said. "Big, healthy boy, must be close to 9 pounds. Preston moved to Katherine's side and looked down at the baby. The infant had stopped crying and was now looking around with dark, unfocused eyes. He had a shock of dark hair and a serious expression that made Preston laugh. "He looks like he is already judging me," Preston said. "He is perfect," Katherine said softly. "Preston, look what we made." Preston sat on the edge of the bed carefully and put his arm around Katherine's shoulders. Together they looked at their son, marveling at his tiny fingers and the way his mouth moved as if he were trying to speak. "What should we name him?" Katherine asked. Preston had been thinking about this for months. "What about Patrick? It was my father's name." Katherine considered it, then nodded. "Patrick Nolan, I like it. Patrick after your father and—" She paused. "Andrew for a middle name after mine." "Patrick Andrew Nolan." Preston tested the name. "It is perfect, he is perfect." Doc Henderson finished packing up his bag. "I will leave you 3 alone. Katherine, you need rest. Preston, make sure she gets it. And congratulations to you both." After the doctor left, Preston lay down on the bed next to Katherine, careful not to jostle her. She was cradling Patrick against her chest, and the baby was making small snuffling sounds. "I cannot believe he is here," Katherine whispered. "Our son." "I know." Preston stroked Patrick's soft head gently. "We are parents now. That is terrifying. And wonderful." "And wonderful," Preston agreed. "Just like everything else with you." Katherine looked at him, her honey-colored eyes full of love. "I never thought I could be this happy. A year and a half ago, I was stumbling into Eagar thinking my life was over. And now look at me. I have a husband who loves me, a beautiful son, a home. It is more than I ever dreamed possible. You deserved all of it and more." Preston kissed her forehead. "You are the strongest, bravest, most amazing woman I have ever known, and I am honored to be your husband and Patrick's father. Promise me something, Preston. Anything. Promise me we will tell Patrick how we met, how you found me when I was broken and helped me put myself back together. I want him to know that even when things seem hopeless, there is always a chance for happiness if you are brave enough to reach for it. I promise. We will tell him everything when he is old enough to understand." Preston carefully took Patrick from Katherine's arms, holding his son for the first time. The baby was warm and solid, and Preston felt a fierce surge of protectiveness. "And we will make sure he knows how to treat people with kindness and respect, especially women. We will raise him to be nothing like Carl and everything like the man I want to be." "You are already that man," Katherine said. "You have been from the moment I met you." Preston sat there holding his son while Katherine drifted off to sleep, exhausted from labor. He looked at Patrick's tiny face and made silent promises. He would protect this child. He would love him and guide him and teach him right from wrong. He would build a life for this family that was safe and happy and full of love. The first year with Patrick was exhausting but joyful. The baby was colicky and did not sleep well, which meant neither Preston nor Katherine got much rest. But even in the midst of the sleepless nights and endless diaper changes, there was happiness. Patrick's first smile, his first laugh, the way he would grab Preston's finger with his tiny fist and hold on tight. Katherine took to motherhood naturally, despite her fears. She was patient and loving, singing to Patrick and rocking him for hours when he was fussy. Preston helped as much as he could, walking the floor with the baby at 3 in the morning so Katherine could get a few hours of sleep, changing diapers, making bottles. They worked together as a team, just as they had promised. And slowly, Patrick grew from a fussy infant into a happy, curious baby. By the time Patrick was a year old, Katherine was pregnant again. This time, she knew what to expect and the pregnancy was easier. She was sick for only a few weeks, and then she felt wonderful. "I think it is going to be a girl this time," she told Preston one evening while they watched Patrick toddle around the cabin, exploring everything within reach. "What makes you say that? Just a feeling. Would you be disappointed if it was? Are you joking? I would love a daughter." Preston pulled Katherine onto his lap, careful of her growing belly. "Boy or girl, it does not matter. As long as you and the baby are healthy, I will be happy." The baby, as it turned out, was indeed a girl. She was born in June of 1885, an easy birth compared to Patrick's. She came into the world pink and screaming, with a full head of blonde hair that surprised everyone. "Where did that come from?" Preston asked, staring at the golden fuzz covering his daughter's head. Both he and Katherine had dark hair. "My grandmother was blonde," Katherine said, cradling the baby. "I guess she got that from her. They named her Lily Grace, and she was as different from Patrick as night from day. Where Patrick had been a difficult baby, Lily was easy and content. She slept through the night at 6 weeks, smiled constantly, and rarely cried unless she was truly upset. Patrick, now a year and a half, was fascinated by his baby sister. He wanted to touch her constantly, bringing her his toys and patting her head with his chubby hands. Preston and Katherine had to watch him carefully to make sure he did not accidentally hurt her in his enthusiasm. "Gentle, Patrick," Katherine would say, guiding his hand to stroke Lily's arm softly. "She is little. We have to be gentle." Life on the ranch settled into a new rhythm with 2 children. Preston built an addition onto the cabin, adding 2 more bedrooms so the children would not have to share. He hired a ranch hand to help with the cattle so he could spend more time with his family. Katherine managed the household and the children with cheerful efficiency, though Preston made sure she got breaks when she needed them. The years passed in a blur of milestones and memories. Patrick's first words, Lily's first steps. Family dinners around the table with the children chattering away. Christmases with a tree decorated with strings of popcorn and paper ornaments the children made. Summer days spent by the creek, teaching the children to fish and swim. Preston and Katherine grew together, their love deepening with each passing year. They still had their rough moments. Katherine still had nightmares about Carl sometimes, though they grew rarer with time. Preston worked too hard and forgot to rest, and Katherine had to remind him that he was not invincible. But they weathered every storm together, always coming back to the foundation of love and respect they had built. They argued sometimes, but always talked it through. They made mistakes but forgave each other. They celebrated victories and comforted each other through losses. In 1887, When Patrick was 4 and Lily was 2, Katherine gave birth to twins. 2 boys this time, whom they named Samuel and Thomas. The twins were identical, with dark hair and gray eyes like Preston. They were also trouble from the moment they could crawl, getting into everything and keeping Katherine on her toes. 4 children, Preston said one evening, watching the chaos that was dinner time with 4 small children. Patrick was arguing with Lily about whose turn it was to say grace. The twins were throwing food at each other. Katherine looked exhausted but happy. "We have 4 children. When did that happen?" "You know exactly when that happened," Katherine said with a laugh. "You were there." "Fair point." Preston picked up one of the twins. He thought it was Samuel, but it was hard to tell, and wiped mashed potatoes off his face. "We are going to need a bigger table. We are going to need a bigger everything, but I would not change a thing." "Neither would I." The children grew, and the ranch prospered. Preston's cattle herd expanded, and he became known throughout the territory as a fair dealer and an honest rancher. Katherine's garden became famous locally, and she sold vegetables and preserves in town, putting the money aside for the children's future. Patrick grew into a thoughtful, serious boy who loved books and learning. He spent hours reading by lamplight, devouring everything he could get his hands on. Preston built him a shelf for his books and added to the collection whenever he went to town. Lily was bright and adventurous, always climbing trees and exploring the creek. She drove Katherine to distraction with her fearlessness, but made everyone laugh with her antics. The twins were inseparable, their own small unit within the family. They spoke in their own language that only they understood and seemed to communicate without words. They were mischievous but sweet-natured, and Preston loved them fiercely. As the children grew older, Preston and Katherine made sure to tell them the story of how they met. Not all the details, those would wait until the children were older, but the important parts. How Katherine had been lost and Preston had helped her find her way. How they had fallen in love and built a family together. How love and kindness could heal even the deepest wounds. "Your mother is the bravest person I know," Preston told the children one night when they were gathered around the fire. Patrick was 10, Lily was 8, and the twins were 6. "She survived things that would have broken most people, and she came through it stronger." "What kind of things?" Patrick asked. Preston and Katherine exchanged a glance. They had agreed to be honest with the children to an age-appropriate degree. "Your mother's first husband was not a kind man," Preston said carefully. "He hurt her, and she had to be very brave to leave him and start a new life. That is how she ended up in Eagar, and that is how we met." "He was mean to Mama." Lily's face scrunched up in anger. "I would have punched him." "Violence is not the answer, sweetheart," Katherine said gently, "but I appreciate the sentiment. The important thing is that I got away from him, and I found your father, and we built this beautiful family together. Sometimes bad things happen, but good things can come from them if we are brave and do not give up hope." "You were really brave, Mama," Patrick said seriously. "So was your father, for giving me a chance when he barely knew me." Katherine smiled at Preston across the circle of children. "We saved each other, really." The children seemed to accept this explanation, though Preston knew they would have more questions as they got older. That was fine. He and Katherine had agreed they would always be honest with their children about their past, because the lessons in it were too valuable to hide. The years continued to pass. The children grew into teenagers, then young adults. Patrick went away to college in Tucson, studying law. Lily married a neighboring rancher's son, a good man named Thomas Blake, who treated her with respect and love. The twins stayed on the ranch, working alongside Preston and learning the business. Preston and Katherine grew older together, their hair graying and faces lined, but their love as strong as ever. They still sat on the porch in the evenings, holding hands and watching the sunset. They still argued about Civil War generals and laughed at each other's terrible jokes. They still looked at each other with the same love and wonder they had felt that first year together. "Did you ever imagine our life would turn out like this?" Katherine asked one evening. They were in their 60s now, surrounded by grandchildren. Patrick had 3 children, Lily had 4, and the twins were both married with families of their own. "Honestly, no." Preston squeezed her hand. "That day I found you at the water trough, I just wanted to help someone in need. I had no idea you would become the center of my entire world. I told you I was used up and worthless, remember? And I told you that you were priceless and mine. I was right." Katherine laughed. "You were, about that and so many other things." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "Thank you, Preston, for seeing me when I was invisible. For loving me when I thought I was unlovable. For giving me this life, this family, this happiness. Thank you for being brave enough to accept my help, for trusting me with your heart, for building this life with me." Preston kissed the top of her head. "I would do it all again in a heartbeat." "So would I." They sat there on the porch as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple, just like that first evening so many years ago. The ranch stretched out before them, green and prosperous. Somewhere inside, their grandchildren were laughing. The life they had built together surrounded them, solid and real and good. Preston thought back to that sweltering August day in 1883 when he had found a broken woman at a water trough and decided to help. It had seemed like such a small thing at the time, offering her water and taking her to the doctor. But it had changed everything. That one moment of compassion had led to a lifetime of love and happiness. "I love you, Katherine Nolan," Preston said softly. "I love you too, Preston Nolan," Katherine replied. "Forever." And that was exactly how long they had together. Forever in the ways that mattered. In the children they had raised, the grandchildren who carried their names and their stories forward. In the ranch that would stay in the family for generations. In the love story they had built from broken pieces and brave choices. The Nolan Ranch thrived for decades after Preston and Katherine's deaths, passing to their children and grandchildren. But more than the land or the cattle or the buildings, what endured was the story. The story of how a cowboy found a woman who thought she was worthless and showed her she was priceless. The story of how love and kindness could heal even the deepest wounds. The story of how 2 broken people had found each other and built something beautiful together. Years later, long after both Preston and Katherine had passed away peacefully in their sleep, their great-grandchildren would still gather around fires and listen to the tale of how their ancestors had met. They would hear about the courage it took for Katherine to walk away from abuse, and the compassion it took for Preston to offer help to a stranger. They would learn about building partnerships based on respect and equality, about treating everyone with dignity, about never giving up hope even in the darkest times. And somewhere, in whatever place souls go after death, Preston and Katherine Nolan smiled, knowing that the love they had built continued to ripple outward, touching lives and teaching lessons long after they were gone. They had started with nothing but each other, and they had created everything that mattered. The end had come for both of them gently, in their sleep, within days of each other, as if neither could bear to be without the other for long. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, under a pair of ponderosa pines they had planted on their 10th wedding anniversary. Their shared headstone bore a simple inscription: Preston Nolan, 1856, 1923, Katherine Nolan, 1857-1923, together forever, as promised, and indeed they were. In the land they had worked, the children they had raised, the love they had shared, and the legacy they had built. Preston and Katherine Nolan's story became legend in Eagar, Arizona, a testament to the power of compassion, the strength of love, and the truth that no one is ever truly worthless when someone sees their value. Their cabin still stood decades later, preserved by the family as a reminder of where it all began. Visitors would come and see the simple rooms where 4 children had been raised, the porch where 2 people had fallen in love, the bedroom where Katherine had first felt safe enough to sleep without nightmares. They would hear the story and go away changed, understanding that sometimes the most important thing you can do is offer kindness to someone who needs it, because you never know how that single act of compassion might change the world. Preston had been right that first day, though he could not have known how right. Katherine had been priceless, not because of anything she owned or any role she filled, but because every human being has inherent worth that cannot be destroyed by cruelty or abuse or hardship. He had seen that worth when she could not, and in doing so, he had helped her see it too. And Katherine had been priceless to Preston specifically because of who she was. Her intelligence, her humor, her strength, her capacity for love despite everything she had been through. She had made his life richer and fuller and more meaningful than he had ever imagined possible. Together, they had created something that would last long after they were gone. In the end, that was what mattered. Not the hardships they had overcome or the obstacles they had faced, but the love they had built and the family they had raised and the kindness they had shown to each other and to the world. They had taken brokenness and turned it into beauty. They had taken despair and turned it into hope. They had taken 2 wounded souls and made them whole. And that, more than anything else, was the legacy of Preston and Katherine Nolan. Not just a successful ranch or a large family, but the proof that love, real love built on respect and partnership and compassion, could overcome anything. That no one was beyond saving, no situation beyond hope, no wound beyond healing, as long as there were people willing to see the value in others, and to offer help without expecting anything in return. Their story spread beyond Eagar, becoming part of the folklore of Arizona, a tale told and retold until it took on almost mythical proportions. But at its heart, it remained the simple truth of what had actually happened. A man had found a woman in need and helped her. They had fallen in love. They had built a life together. They had been happy. Sometimes the most powerful stories are the simplest ones, and sometimes the most extraordinary things come from the most ordinary moments of human kindness. And so the story of Preston and Katherine Nolan lived on, inspiring generations, teaching lessons about compassion and courage, reminding people that it is never too late to start over, never too broken to be healed, never too lost to be found. All it takes is someone willing to see you, really see you and say you matter, you have value, you are worth saving, you are priceless, and you are not alone. That was Preston's gift to Katherine, and in accepting it, Katherine had given Preston the gift of allowing him to be the man he wanted to be. They had saved each other, healed each other, loved each other through everything life had thrown at them. And they had done it together, hand in hand, heart to heart, building something beautiful from the ashes of Katherine's old life and the loneliness of Preston's solitary existence. In the spring of 1924, the year after both Preston and Katherine had passed, their children planted a garden on the site where the original garden had been. It had been Katherine's favorite place on the ranch, where she had spent countless hours tending vegetables and flowers, finding peace in the rhythm of planting and weeding and harvesting. The children and grandchildren worked together, preparing the soil and planting seeds, laughing and crying and remembering, When the garden bloomed that summer, it was glorious. Tomatoes and beans and squash, just like Katherine used to grow. Flowers in every color, bright against the Arizona sky. And in the center, they placed a bench with a plaque that read, Katherine's Garden, where everything grew from love. Visitors to the ranch would sit on that bench and look out over the garden and the ranch beyond, and they would think about the woman who had created all of this from nothing, who had taken her broken life and built something beautiful, who had been brave enough to accept help when she needed it and wise enough to recognize love when it was offered, who had raised 4 children and countless grandchildren to know their worth and to see the worth in others. And they would think about Preston, the cowboy who had seen a woman in need and made the choice to help, not knowing it would lead to the greatest love story of his life, who had shown Katherine what love was supposed to look like and then lived that love every single day for 40 years, who had been patient and kind and steadfast, building a life and a legacy that would outlast him by generations. Their story was not perfect. There had been struggles and hardships, moments of doubt and fear and pain. Katherine's nightmares about Carl had persisted for years, though they eventually faded. There had been hard winters when money was tight, summers when drought threatened the cattle, illnesses that nearly took one or another of the children. Life had not been easy, even after they found each other. But through it all, they had each other, and that had made all the difference. When Katherine woke from nightmares, Preston was there to hold her. When Preston worried about the ranch, Katherine was there to remind him they had survived worse. When the children were sick, they tended them together. When times were hard, they faced them together. They had built their life on a foundation of partnership and mutual respect, and that foundation had held through everything. Now, more than a century after that hot August day in 1883 when their story began, the Nolan family still gathers at the ranch every year on the anniversary of Preston and Katherine's wedding. They come from all over the country, hundreds of descendants, to remember and to celebrate. They tell the old stories and add new ones. They walk the land that Preston and Katherine built. They visit the graves on the hill and leave wildflowers, the same kind Katherine used to weave into her hair, and they remember the lessons. That everyone has value, no matter what they have been through. That love is built on respect and partnership, not possession or control. That courage is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to keep going despite it. That kindness to a stranger can change the world. That it is never too late to start over, never too broken to heal, never too lost to find your way home. These lessons, more than the land or the money or the family name, are the true inheritance Preston and Katherine left behind. And they continue to ripple outward, generation after generation, touching lives and changing hearts, just as Preston changed Katherine's life that day by seeing her value when she could not see it herself, and just as Katherine changed Preston's life by having the courage to accept his help and to love him in return. In the end, that is what their story teaches, that we all have the power to change lives through simple acts of kindness and compassion, that we all have value no matter what the world or our circumstances have told us. That love, real love, is possible even after the worst trauma and heartbreak. That partnership and respect are the foundations of any lasting relationship. That family is what you build, not just what you are born into. Preston and Katherine Nolan built something extraordinary from the most ordinary of materials. 2 wounded souls, a small ranch in the Arizona high country, faith in each other and love. Just love, freely given and gratefully received. And from that, they built a legacy that continues to inspire and teach long after they have gone. Their story is a reminder that there are no small acts of kindness. That helping one person might seem insignificant in the grand scheme of things, but to that person, to Katherine stumbling into Eagar in 1883, it means everything. It means survival. It means hope. It means the possibility of a future that had seemed impossible. And their story is a reminder that healing is possible. That no matter what has been done to you, no matter how broken you feel, there is always the possibility of wholeness again. It might take time. It might take help. It might take more courage than you think you have. But it is possible. Katherine proved that. She took the shattered pieces of her life and built something beautiful. She learned to trust again, to love again, to believe in her own worth again. And in doing so, she became the strong, remarkable woman Preston had seen in her all along. Preston and Katherine Nolan's story is ultimately about transformation. About the transformation that happens when someone sees you for who you really are, beneath the damage and the fear and the lies you have been told about yourself. About the transformation that happens when you find the courage to accept love and to give it in return. About the transformation that happens when you build a life based on respect and partnership rather than control and possession. They transformed each other and were transformed by each other. Preston became not just a rancher but a husband and father, someone whose life had meaning beyond just survival. Katherine became not just a survivor but someone who thrived, who laughed, who loved, who built something lasting. Together, they became more than either could have been alone. And that transformation did not end with them. It continued through their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, spreading outward in concentric circles like ripples on a pond. Every person they touched with their kindness, every life they changed with their example, every descendant who learned their lessons and passed them on, was part of that ongoing transformation. More than a century later, the transformation continues. People still tell the story of Preston and Katherine Nolan, the cowboy and the broken woman who found each other and built a love that lasted. They tell it to teach compassion, to inspire courage, to prove that transformation is possible no matter where you start or what you have been through. And somewhere, in whatever place souls go after death, Preston and Katherine smile. Because they know that the love they built, the life they created, the lessons they taught, have become immortal. Not in some abstract, metaphorical sense, but in the very real and concrete way that their story continues to change lives, to give hope, to prove that kindness matters and love heals, and everyone, absolutely everyone, has value. Preston was right that day in the cabin kitchen when he told Katherine she was priceless. She was then, and she always had been, even when she could not see it herself. And in recognizing that truth and helping Katherine see it too, Preston gave her the greatest gift one human being can give another. Not just safety or shelter or physical help, though those mattered too, but the gift of seeing herself as she truly was valuable, worthy, capable of being loved. And Katherine gave Preston a gift in return. She gave him the chance to be the man he wanted to be, to live up to his own values of compassion and kindness and respect. She gave him a family and a legacy and a love that made every day meaningful. She gave him the knowledge that he had made a real difference in the world, that he had saved a life and built something beautiful in the process. They saved each other. That is the heart of their story. Two people who needed each other finding each other at exactly the right moment. Two people who saw the best in each other when they could not see it in themselves. Two people who chose, every single day, to love and respect and support each other, building something extraordinary from the simple decision to be kind. Preston and Katherine Nolan's love story is not a fairy tale with an impossibly perfect ending. It is a real story about real people who faced real challenges and overcame them through love and partnership. It is a story about choosing hope over despair, courage over fear, love over hate. It is a story about transformation and healing and the power of human connection. And it is a story that continues, even now, more than a century later, every time it is told. Every time someone hears about Preston and Katherine and decides to be a little kinder, to offer help to someone in need, to see the value in another person even when that person cannot see it themselves, the story lives on. Every time someone escapes an abusive situation and finds the courage to start over, the story lives on. Every time two people build a relationship based on respect and equality and love, the story lives on. That is the true legacy of Preston and Katherine Nolan. Not just the ranch or the family or the material things they built, but the ongoing ripples of transformation their story creates. The proof that one act of kindness can change a life, that love can heal even the deepest wounds, that no one is ever truly worthless as long as there are people willing to see their worth. She said she was used up and worthless. He answered that she was priceless and his to protect. And in that exchange, in that moment of recognition and compassion, everything changed. A life was saved. A love was born. A legacy was built. And the world became a little bit better because two people chose to see the best in each other and to build something beautiful together. That is the story of Preston and Katherine Nolan. And it is a story worth telling, worth remembering, worth passing on, because it reminds us all of what is possible when we choose love over hate, compassion over indifference, hope over despair. It reminds us that we all have value, we all matter, we are all capable of transformation. It reminds us that sometimes the most important thing we can do is see another person, really see them, and recognize their worth. And so the story continues, generation after generation, year after year, touching lives and changing hearts and proving that love, real love, built on respect and partnership and compassion, is the most powerful force in the world. More powerful than hate, than abuse, than trauma, than despair. Love wins. Love heals. Love transforms. That is what Preston and Katherine proved with their lives. And that is what their story continues to prove every time it is told, every time someone hears it and is inspired to be a little braver, a little kinder, a little more compassionate. Their love became immortal not through grand gestures or dramatic moments, but through the simple, daily choice to care for each other, to respect each other, to build a life together based on partnership and equality. And in the end, that is more than enough. More than enough to create a legacy that lasts. More than enough to change the world, one life at a time. More than enough to prove that everyone, no matter what they have been through, has value and deserves to be loved. Preston and Katherine Nolan knew that truth and lived it every day of their lives together. And because they did, their story continues, their legacy endures, and their love remains a beacon of hope for anyone who has ever felt worthless, broken, or lost. They proved that transformation is possible, that healing is real, and that love, true love, can overcome anything. That is their gift to the world. And it is a gift that keeps on giving generation after generation, life after life, heart after heart. The cowboy and the woman he found at a water trough on a hot August day in 1883. Two people who found each other when they both needed it most. Two people who built a love that lasted and a legacy that continues. Two people who proved that kindness matters, compassion heals, and love, always love, wins in the end.